All right. Oh, welcome. Our topic this evening is bird migration. And as I was researching this, I found another acknowledgement. I found that there have been some horrific things done to birds in order to learn about them. So I want to honor the lives of the animals who were experimented upon without their consent in order that humans could entertain their curiosity and gain this information. So I imagine that we all have a sense of what migration is. You know, it's a common subject on nature programs, and we live in an area where we're fortunate to see migration occurring twice a year with the birds moving through, and then also with the salmon and their annual migration up the rivers to spawn. It's sort of like this biological inhale and exhale that we're aware of, even if we're not directly observing it. And so tonight's program is focusing on bird migration because we're going to be visiting an area later this month where we're going to be able to see birds on their annual return north to breed. I'm going to be focusing tonight on some of the superpowers that birds have to help them find their way. So as I mentioned, we've all got a sense of what migration is, but maybe not a real understanding of the phenomenon. At least that's what I discovered about myself as I started putting this talk together. I assumed that I had a better understanding of the topic than I actually did. And as I started noticing my questions and doing more reading, I realized that this is a topic that somebody could spend their entire life learning about and still not have all their questions answered. I suppose that pretty much everything's like that, but what follows this presentation tonight is basically my initial explorations into the phenomenon of bird migration. And a lot of what I'm sharing is incomplete because I'm still just learning it myself. Basically, I'm sharing with you the findings of a curious mind rather than the well-researched and embodied understanding of somebody who's been studying this at school or does it for their job. So think about what I'm sharing tonight more as a launching off point for your own learning rather than like a solid, like an encyclopedia reference. And make sure to double check everything in case you're at trivia night, you know, like check the facts. I try and make my presentations as factual as possible, but there's always the possibility that I misunderstood something I read. A lot of the papers I was looking at were scientific, and I was trying to take in as much information as I could before I put this together. So yeah, I guess just double check anything before you, you know, bet on it. So my initial questions were like, why did birds start migrating? What's the theory about why migrations exist in the first place? How is it that we have different flyways? And then is there any information on how these different flyways formed? And my slides and what I'm saying aren't necessarily going to match up. I just wanted to put some information on here so that it wasn't just me talking the whole time, so you had actually something to look at as well. But this slide, you know, the basic definition of migration is the seasonal movements from one region to another. And those movements could be altitudinal, so animals that move up and down elevation, or it could be latitudinal where they're moving up and down across the continent, north and south across the continent. We're focusing on the second one tonight. So like any other phenomenon that started before humans existed, there's really no way for us to really know how or why birds started migrating. Going into this question, I figured it had something to do with the ice ages, you know, thinking that as the glaciers started coming down from the north, that it was forcing birds south who'd once lived up here. And then as the ice retreated, then they started moving back and decided they liked having two places to live. But it turns out that birds have been migrating longer than our current ice age. So looking at this timeline, there's theoretical evidence that the Galapagos hawk, for example, which is an endemic species in the Galapagos Islands, is actually a descendant of a flock of Swainson's hawks that were blown off course or otherwise got waylaid 300,000 years ago to the Galapagos. And so the first evidence of humans in the fossil record is 250,000 years ago. So birds have been migrating longer than we've existed as a species. And the ice age that we're currently in and exiting from started only 115,000 years ago. So bird migrations have been going on for a very long time. So one of the questions that researchers have been trying to figure out is where did migration start from? Did they start in the north? Did the birds start as like in our region? Did they start in the northern hemisphere and then learn to go south for the winter, or did they start in the southern hemisphere and learn to come north to breed? And researchers from the University of Chicago, the evidence, we don't have evidence. We can't find this out looking at the fossil records. So what they did is they created a mathematical model to analyze the ranges of modern birds. And then looking at their evolutionary relationships, they kind of reconstructed historical routes of their ancestors. And what their research suggests is that more than half of the species that half of the songbirds in the Western Hemisphere actually evolved in North America and then developed, learned to go south for the winter. And there's actually evidence that some of the species in the tropics are birds that originally lived in the Northern Hemisphere and decided to stay in the tropics. That's actually happening right now with barn swallows. There's a breeding population that's established itself in Argentina. So they just simply stopped coming back to North America. They're like, we like it down here, plenty of food year round, we're staying. Other species have tried that and they're not successful at creating a breeding population, though there may be adults that stay down there, but the barn swallows are pulling it off. And so scientists have an example of this happening today where species are changing their range. So some evidence suggests, and speaking along that, evidence suggests that birds are pretty adaptable to changes in their environments. And aside from just the example with the barn swallow, this is a diagram showing the northern wheat eater. So the northern wheat eater's original range was in Europe, and then they would winter in Africa. Well, as the glaciers have receded and more of the northern hemisphere has been exposed, the northern wheat eater population has been spreading out in both directions from Europe. The fascinating thing is that they have become circumpolar. They're around the entire northern hemisphere, just about. But birds that, how do I say this? Birds that migrated east, crossed Russia and towards Alaska, they continue to take a westerly route to get back to Africa. And the birds that migrated west take an easterly route to get back to Africa. It would be shorter for the birds in Alaska to go east to Africa, but their DNA, the internal maps, I'll talk about this a little bit later, their internal maps drive them east or drive them westward to get to Africa. So that's what I'm trying to show with this diagram here. And so these animals have adapted, but they're still retaining their original flyway. And a more recent adaptation, so this one with the northern wheat eaters has been happening over probably hundreds of thousands of years, not hundreds, sorry, tens of thousands of years, as the glaciers have receded. I guess thousands of years. Our last glaciation period was 12,000 years ago. So in the last 10,000 years, they've spread across the northern hemisphere. A more recent adaptation example is a population of white storks in Europe, and they have learned, I guess there's different groups of them. Some of them have learned that they can overwinter, they can find food over the winter by foraging at the local dumps. And then other groups are foraging at fish ponds. So instead of migrating out of the country like the rest of their species, these subgroups, these subpopulations just go to their local feeding holes and stay all winter. So there's some positive, I guess, adaptations to human human development of the landscape. So looking at these, so I'm going to switch over now. So we're looking at these vast distances, you know, like this this northern weed eater that is coming from Alaska is traveling over 4,000 miles to get to Africa for their summer feeding and back again to breed. So how are they finding their way, right? That's a very long distance. And you know, how are they able to navigate such long distances? How do they stay on course? How do they avoid getting lost, right? These are some questions that have come up. And it turns out birds do get lost from time to time. That it may happen more frequently in modern times because of the changes that we're making on the landscape, including things like keeping the night sky lit up. You know, we have a lot of invasive lighting, basically, and that can cause a problem for migrating animals. It turns out that most birds actually migrate at nighttime, and they utilize the celestial bodies to navigate. And when we light up the skies with our cities and towns, that can disorient them. But there's other things that can disorient the birds and to get them off course, such as storms and actually the fluctuations in the magnetic lines of the Earth. The magnetic field, that's the word I'm looking for. So Earth's magnetic field can also have fluctuations that can cause the birds to end up someplace that they weren't intending to go. And this has been going on for a very long time. You know, the Galapagos hawk is an example. That's over 300,000 years ago. These are a couple of birds from Hawaii that are descendants from birds in the North American region, or the Northern Hemisphere. Excuse me, the Western Hemisphere. They, this is the nene, which is a descendant of the Canada goose, and the Cola maoli, which is a descendant of the mallard duck and the Laotian teal. And so other examples are like Darwin's finches in the Galapagos, right? So that the finches arrive there long enough, far enough back in time where they've developed all these different species of birds that live in the islands there. So going back to navigation, birds have several tools for navigation. Using their eyes, they can orient to the landscape, just like we do when we're learning a route. They can use celestial objects like the sun, the moon, and the stars to stay on course. And they're able to sense the Earth's magnetic field with a special protein molecule in their eyes. Using their noses, some birds actually rely on odors more than any other tool to help orient themselves to, especially over long distances with no visual cues like in the ocean or over the ocean. And then birds are also born with an internal map that in some species is the only clue for them on where to go as they travel alone on their first migration south. Daytime migrators, such as geese and hawks, use the position of the sun and their internal sense of time to stay on track as they're traveling south or north. So they're able to track the fact that the sun, you know, the apparent movement of the sun through the sky, and in their sense of the time of day to stay on course. And then they also use local landmarks to help guide them along their route. But like I said earlier, most birds are nighttime migrators, including many of the songbirds, those little guys. And so there's several benefits to migrating at night. One of them is avoiding predators, like all the hawks that are migrating during the day. It's also a way for them to stay cool as they're migrating. And these birds, they're using the moon and the position of the stars to help guide their way. And the theory, that my understanding of the research is, it's not like they're looking at individual stars and like, oh, there's Orion, I need to go, you know, left of Orion. It's more that kind of like how they do with the sun during the day, they orient they learn as over the summertime, as they're just living their lives, they learn where north is basically, because the sky is rotating around a fixed point. And so they use that, that apparent rotation to orient themselves as they're flying north or south. And even when clouds are obscuring the sky, they can use position, you've probably noticed this at night, that even if it's cloudy, there's still some light from, like if the moon's out, there's still some light. And and the and this distant glow can be over overridden, I guess, overpowered, that's the word I'm looking for, overpowered by the glow of cities and towns, as I mentioned earlier. And so the light in our area, our living areas, can disorient migrating birds. So there's actually a movement on the East Coast during migration time to turn the lights out at night to help keep from distracting the birds. This nighttime lighting is an issue with sea turtles as well. So when sea turtles hatch and they come up out of the sand, they orient towards the light, which in a normal non-human area is going to be over the ocean. It's going to be the lighter side of the beach. But when there's a town built up right next to the beach, then they're actually being drawn towards the lights of the town instead of towards the ocean, and ending up in places where they're not going to survive. Okay, so scientists have known since the 1960s that birds are also able to orient to Earth's magnetic field, but it's only recently that they've been piecing together how. And thanks to a kind of multidisciplinary crew of scientists, they're figuring out that there's this protein in the eye of birds that reacts to the Earth's magnetism. And I don't understand the science yet. It's very complex to me. It's an interaction between light and the magnetic field. So if there's absolutely zero light, it doesn't work. There has to be light. But birds are able to see the magnetic field and then use that to help orient. And the visualizations that I've seen about this, like what it might look to a bird, reminds me of a fog bow. So I put a picture of a fog bow up here for you. But they think it may look like, and if you imagine the inside of that fog bow being dark, they imagine that it may look like dark lines across the landscape. And so the birds are able to, use those as kind of guideposts along their way. In addition to this molecule in their eyes, scientists have found that there's a region in the brain that is apparently directly correlated to this particular skill of being able to see the magnetic field of the Earth. And this trait, this ability to see, can be disrupted by electrical signals that we send. Apparently very faint ones can actually disrupt this ability in birds. So it's a highly sensitive trait. Luckily, it's not the only thing that they rely on, but it is something that they use to help guide themselves as they migrate. Some birds, like I mentioned, they rely more on their sense of smell to find their way than on visual cues, especially those that fly over long distances of water without any landscape features that they can track. There's several studies describing how scientists learn this. They disabled the bird's ability to smell, and then they looked at the results. But I wasn't able to find, they talked about how the birds are smelling something and that's helping them to guide their way through the world, but I didn't see anything on what they're smelling. So I'm making an assumption that they're smelling the land and the trees, the vegetation, or maybe the guano, I'm not sure. And there are birds that use the sense of smell over land as well. And that was even more perplexing to me, because what are they discerning up there over land that can help guide their way across the continent? Yeah, I'm very curious about that, but like I said, I haven't been able to find anything on it yet. So let's see. The final superpower that I want to talk about was this one where birds are actually born with a genetic memory of their parents' migration routes. So these pre-programmed maps basically are telling first-year birds what direction to fly and for how long. It reminds me of a game that I used to play. It's kind of like a team building game where a person is blindfolded and they have to navigate around a room, and someone's just telling them, kind of shouting out, all right, you're going to take 3 steps straight ahead, turn left, take 4 steps, turn right, take 10 steps. So that's kind of how this map may work with the birds, is they just have this urge to travel a certain distance for a certain period of time, make an adjustment, and go for another period of time and make an adjustment until they get to their destination. An unfortunate byproduct of this, I guess it's not unfortunate, it could be fortunate, but a byproduct of this is that if you have parents, if the birds have parents that are from 2 different populations, so take the northern wheat eater example, say you have the dad is from Alaska and the mom is from Newfoundland, they have 2 completely different internal maps. And so their offspring, what scientists have found is that the offspring of parents with 2 different maps will actually merge those maps together and then end up someplace completely different than where they're supposed to be. So I showed that on here with the on this map, the mom, her migration route is represented in blue, the dad's is represented in yellow, and then their offspring is represented in green. And so if the offspring is born in Newfoundland, they're going to end up somewhere off of the west coast of Mexico. And if they were born in Alaska, they would end up somewhere down in India. Now this, if it's a single bird, would be the end of the bird, basically, because they wouldn't know how to get home necessarily, and they would just be by themselves. If an entire generation of birds got this misinformation, then it might end up creating a new flyway, right? If they were successful in overwintering in that new location, it could produce a new flyway, and this might be one of the ways that different flyways are established for similar species. All right, any questions so far? I think that might be okay. Yeah, so for me, I was getting in this pretty deep. I had a lot more topics that I was actually going to write out and put slides together for you, and I ran out of time. So I'll just share some of the lines of thinking that I was going along. The next question I wanted to address is what actually triggers birds to migrate. And some things that came up were the changing length of day, and that they actually have their hormones change as it gets close to migration time. And so they get something called migratory restlessness, which drives them to certain behaviors such as eating more. So they put on weight for the journey, and other behaviors, like if some birds will molt before they migrate, some molt afterwards. So there's all these different physiological things that happen to them as the year progresses. And then there's also this phenomenon where captive birds that are migratory will actually go through the motions of migration in captivity. And so they will attempt to fly a certain direction for a certain period of time, and then they will change direction and try and fly that direction for a certain period of time, even though they're confined to a cage. So they're basically mimicking the movements of the rest of their species, but in a one little area. Another question I wanted to explore is, where do they go? Like, what are the different flyways that they have? And I guess we all kind of know this, but for me, I live in North America, so I have a North American, centric thinking process, and I forget that migration is happening all around the planet. Migration's happening everywhere. I just recently learned, we've got the monarch butterflies that have that very complicated migration route around North America. They have a similar phenomenon in Africa with their own species of butterfly. Blew my mind. It's like, well, why not? Of course, there's animals all around the planet. So I was curious about these, these different flyways. And then also, not all species migrate. So that was another thing that was interesting. and I was curious about. And you could have an areas like Alaska has, if you were to look at a diagram of birds that migrate from Alaska, some of them come down along the the western side of North America. Some of them go down the eastern side of Asia. Some of them just fly straight across the ocean all the way to Antarctica. All these different birds are going to all these different places. Why? And how did the Arctic Tern even figure out there was a continent on the other side of the planet? So these are some questions I wanted to explore. And then the other thing was like, what are the threats that they're experiencing along the way? And it's estimated that only about 50% of birds that migrate make it home. They're dying during migration, either because of as they're crossing political borders, there's different level of conservation measures, and so there's hunting and poaching and all these direct human impacts on a number of species as they're traveling. There's human changes to the physical environment, so a wetland that birds may have depended on in previous years could be gone because it was filled in and developed. It could be a farm now, or not a farm anymore. A lot of birds rely on farms. I don't know how farmers feel about that, but I know around here I see a lot of birds that are foraging in farmland as part of their journey. Climate change is having an effect, dwindling resources because of climate change and other impacts. And then they also, they have a tight timeline. And so as they're traveling, they need to be able to water up and to refuel the ones that stop on their migration as they're continuing along. And if those resources aren't at the points where they need them to be, they're not going to make it. If you think about like, if you're going on a road trip, and for me, when I'm traveling a long distance, I like to get a sense of where the gas stations are, like where can I stop to get fuel? And if you're depending on that gas station and it's shut down or it just simply doesn't exist anymore, if it's closed for the night, whatever the case may be, you can't get fuel, you can't continue on your journey. And so with the birds, this not being able to continue on their journey means that that's basically end of life for them. So okay, so those are all the questions I had for myself that I wanted to keep exploring. And as I mentioned at the start of this, I want this to kind of be a launching off point for you. I'm not the expert. I was just someone curious, wanted to do a talk about migration because we're looking at migrating birds. And yeah, I learned more than I thought was even, I learned answers to questions I didn't even think to ask. So it was really fascinating for me. What I wanted to do for our journaling, this was the other thing, I want to transition into journaling portion now. And it was a bit of a challenge trying to come up with something with an activity that related around migration. So in general, nature journaling is a fantastic way to keep track of phenological data, right? So you can record what birds you see, at what time of year, what they're doing. But that's not something that we can do in our short little program here tonight. So I thought maybe it'd be fun to make a nature, make like a field guide page about your favorite bird. And so I think we have some time. Let me check the clock here. So it's about 10 till, and we have until 8:30. And I'd like to leave some time at the end for us to share and to chat. So maybe 20 minutes. And so it's not going to be like the most detailed field guide page, but I thought we could, list out the common and scientific name of your favorite bird or bird that you want to learn more about. Maybe draw a little sketch of the animal and then create a range map showing the summer and winter areas, or maybe its flight path, like a migratory route of the bird. And some birds have an interesting pattern where they don't just fly up and down the same route. And then if you need more things to write or to put in your page, Basically, if you have extra time, you could put challenges your bird might face as it's attempting to migrate, and then any other additional information that you'd like to add. You don't need to do this. This was I wanted to give you a prompt. You're welcome to do whatever you'd like that has to do with migration. Maybe you want to create a scene, a migration scene, or write something about migration. But yeah. Any questions about this? Ideas? Are you good to go? All right, so it's 7:50 now, and so I will bring us back together at 8:10, and we can share our work. So I'm gonna stop record or pause the recording. I'll do about 30 more seconds. That wasn't nearly enough time. I apologize. I spoke longer than I meant to, but
Okay.
hopefully, as I said at the start, it's a launching off point. So for the sake of privacy, and well, I should actually ask you at some point if you care. I had gone into these with the intention of recording the presentation, but not the sharing, so that people would have privacy and not have to worry about being on the internet because I post these to YouTube. Would you prefer that we go ahead and stop the recording for the sharing section? We gotta,
Yeah.
maybe you're okay with keeping going? I'm happy to stop it because that's how I've always done it, but does anyone want to not have this part on the interwebs? No? Okay.
I don't care.
Well, let's keep sharing that. I mean, keep recording because this might be fun for folks that are watching later also. Yeah, so let's share. Who would like to, what y'all think? What did you think about this activity?
Not enough time.
Yeah. I
Because
agree.
it was, trying to get the bird drawn and then all the information that's quite a bit of to accomplish in that length of time.
I got tiny little bit done. So this is, I was doing a crane, and I realized how I just can't do birds fast, which is fine. But it was a lot of fun. What a nice challenge, and what good questions. And that really made me realize how little I know about them.
Great. Okay. Good.
I'll share. I piggybacked on something I had done earlier in the day because this was our journaling day, and it wasn't the migration so much as picking a bird that you're intrigued with or interested in or something. And so I had already done the bobolink, which I am fascinated by the bobolink. And so I haven't got color on it yet, but
all right.
I spent a lot of time looking in reference material for information on which I had done earlier, but I continued that. So if you're not familiar with the bobolink, it is in a grass, grows it lives in the grassy areas, and that's where they nest. And their population is diminishing because their habitat is diminishing. We're building houses, and farmers cut their grass before or during nesting time, and which means that the birds need to leave, and or there's fire, something. We've had pretty good success in our area by talking to the farmers. Sometimes they don't know. And we've had several farmers say, oh, well, I'll just cut these other fields and leave a couple for them. And when they're finished with what they do, then I'll go back and cut. So we've had good luck with that. So we're able to observe the bobolinks in a number of places here. They do migrate to South America. So it's a long jaunt down and a long jaunt back. And they're not here yet. It'll be another couple of months before we see them. But they're so unique. I always think of their heads like an Easter bonnet. It's kind of a creamy color from about halfway on the head to the back. And then from there on, they're mostly black with some white accents. And they flit around. They're related to the blackbirds, and they have a happy song like the meadowlarks, and live in similar areas like the meadowlarks. And so they're always so cheerful, and they're sitting on fences and things, flitting here and flitting there, and helping the males help the females with the nesting process. So
That's
anyway,
awesome.
that was my bird.
They sound lovely.
They are. I didn't know about them until I moved here.
Heather, did I see you ready to go next?
Sure. I was holding up a page of Sibley that had bobolinks on them because I wasn't familiar myself. Can you guys see that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I can't find my Sibley's. I had it earlier and I can't find it.
So I did the sandhill crane. Here, I'll hold this up and let me know if it's out of focus or whatever. So here. Oh, I forgot about the light issue. There we go. Okay, so sandhill crane, there's my little sketch. I decided that the ones that I'm familiar with are probably the lesser, which means the weight's about 7.3 pounds.
Can you raise your page up a little bit more? There you go.
So I've sort of got sort of used to drawing birds, but North America, forget about it. This is Alaska up here. It's yeah, the scale's not great. But anyway, I was trying to do my best to sort of represent the map that I found in my copy of Sibley. And so there's summer, winter, year round, and the migration area. Then also just he's saying, I have a beautiful voice, because that's actually one of the things that I like most about them is that they have the coolest, and especially if like there's I've heard recordings of like fields of them, and I've only ever seen like maybe like 7 or 8 together at one time, but like if you have a field of them, they're so amazing to listen to. And I've actually seen sandhill cranes in 2 places, one of which is Sauvie Island here in Portland, and then the other is Rifle Bird Sanctuary, which is in outside of Vancouver, BC. They actually have a few that are sort of year-round residents, and they are not shy. They will go right, because they sell bird seed for you to like feed the birds at the sanctuary. They will go right up to you sitting on a bench and like look you in the eye, and you can touch them. They will take seed out of your hand. Yeah. So I have some really interesting like close-up photos of the sandhill cranes there. And then for challenges to migration, I can't specifically say that these are all necessarily true, but just things that I thought that might be issues. So first of all, the fact that the Colorado River, which is a huge lifeline of water in the Western US, is more or less drying up, partly, well, just for many reasons, but over irrigation, overdrawing water for irrigation and people is a big cause of it. Light pollution, specifically in like Phoenix, the Southern California area, like LA or whatever, Denver. Let's see here. Potentially, this is one I'm not entirely certain of, but there is some part of the map that's in Mexico. And something I learned about DDT is that well, at least it used to still be legal there. I don't know if it is anymore, but DDT has sort of bad effects on other birds. So I thought that might be an issue for sandhill cranes. And let's see here. Oh, temperature spikes, for example, when it was 117 degrees here last summer, and or late cold season, like the fact that it was snowing here in Portland this morning, stuff like that, where we really shouldn't be having that type of weather this late in the season. Well, that's not entirely true, but anyway, sort of like the climate, global warming effects in terms of like making things less predictable. Water sources being poisoned. For example, I was thinking of the Berkeley Pit, which is an open mine in Montana, which they eventually installed noisemakers on. So after they were having a lot of dead birds, because they would have birds stop over, but just other water sources that sort of have mining detritus or whatnot that are poisoning those places. Also, specifically in Oregon, Smith Bybee Lake levels and Malheur, because the Malheur Refuge is like a huge stop, I guess, for birds in Oregon. Mm-hmm. And then also just the thought that North America, like in the West, I've started this book called Cadillac Desert, and the opening chapters of it are basically about how inherently dry the American West really is. And so the fact that we can sustain such high population in the southwestern part of the US is largely due to man-made stuff involving the Colorado River and its tributaries. And so just thinking about that, and most of this migration, even though this is probably not the best version of this map because it's in black and white, basically the sandhills are migrating. They're not really going further east than the line of states down the center of the US, right? So it's all that and westward. So that's it.
Can I piggyback on that real quick? Because she did cranes and I did cranes. Or I'm learning about cranes. My sister in Germany, she always lets me know when the cranes are coming, when they're migrating. And she usually sends me a clip of the sound. And they go from Siberia to Africa, as you were showing in your maps. And I go to Sauvie Island and I film them and record them and send her videos of our cranes when they're migrating. So that's a real bond we have.
That's so cool.
It goes back to when my dad died. We were at the funeral home and the cranes were coming over. And I heard the cranes and I said, "What are they? What is that?" And she said, "The cranes are coming." And so now we have this, we hear our dad when we hear the cranes, and it's just a really nice thing for us to share. And now I'm curious to learn more about the cranes. So thanks for sharing.
So awesome. I learned something interesting recently about them and their call. If you, I don't know what the search term would be, but they have their trachea actually runs through their, I forgot what it's called, their sternum, the breastbone. And the breastbone has a space in it. So instead of being solid and thin like a chicken breastbone, right? It has an opening inside, so it's kind of like a drum. And their trachea enters into this drum area and back out again. And apparently that has something to do with the interesting sound of their call. So I'll go ahead and go. I chose the American robin. I was actually intending to choose a different bird tonight, but I forgot. There was one I wanted to learn more about, and I forgot to write down its name. And I spent a couple minutes trying to figure it out, and I couldn't. And so then I was like, I'm going to do the robin. I love the robin. And then I wanted to figure out the migration routes of our local robins, and I couldn't find that information anywhere. So I ended up using almost all the time just trying to track down where do the robins that are in my yard come from, and where do the ones that live here in the summer go. And the only thing I could find was reference to them having a short migration route within 300 miles, but that's so vague. It was very unhelpful. So then I did speed painting in the last a couple of minutes. And so my focus in the last year or so has been blending colors. I use a limited palette. Well, I'm forcing myself. I have lots of colors, but I've been forcing myself to make all my colors with these 8, and it's getting easier. I love it, actually. I love the challenge. And so so that's what I was focusing on. I did a quick sketch of a robin, and then I blended the breast color, and then as I was talking to you, telling us it's time to wrap up, I was trying to blend a black. And then I just smeared it down the rest of the body and then threw in some yellow. And then the range maps, since I couldn't figure out my local range map, I just used the one for the whole country, which is really useless because it's just saying in general, robins breed up here, and in general, they winter here and here. So there's so much overlap that it's kind of a, yeah, I like more precision in my data. So that was kind of frustrating, but now I've got another question to research. It's like, where do these robins come from? There's got to be data on that somewhere, but maybe not. Next.
Okay, I'll go next. One thing that I've noticed about robins, and I always thought that they left completely, but I notice where I am in Longview, I see them in the winter in large flocks, and they're staying where we are. And I don't know if all of them do, but I was surprised that they didn't leave. They just come back to my yard where I see them getting the worms. And
I always assumed that the ones that we see in the winter are from somewhere else. Same with our
Really?
crows. Yeah. So like
Really?
our summer crows go somewhere else. And then the ones that we get in the winter are from the north. And so I assumed the same thing with the robins, but maybe not.
That could be.
Yeah.
So I don't know either, but I chose the osprey.
Oh, fun.
I don't know if any of you have watched the webcam that the Cowlitz PUD puts up. It's just fabulous. I did it for the first time last year and I couldn't stop watching. So anyway, so there's my osprey, 24 inches tall, 71-inch wingspan, and also called fish hawk, sea hawk, or eagle hawk. And then I drew this terrible map, but it's just a picture of on the Pacific Northwest where the osprey go. So they're here for breeding, and then they go south to California and Central America in the winter. And then in between, I didn't get this painted, but in between it was the migration route. And then someone said that we were talking about challenges for migration, but I missed that note, and I just had the challenges because I watched them on the webcam. Well, these 3 eggs hatched, just amazing. And you see them with no feathers, and then the feathers are poking out, and they are covered with these feathers, and they're juveniles. And one by one on the webcam, you watched an eagle sweep through and take them one at a time, all 3 of them. What a challenge that is, but those eagles are nesting nearby. And that's a sad story, but
there's nature happening right in
Yeah.
front of you. And I thought, well, wow, it's amazing that any of them survive, but they do. I mean, this doesn't happen every year. So I'm looking forward to watching again this year and hopefully seeing them survive.
Get out there with a slingshot and just
I know.
chase off the eagle.
It was awful. But here's one other, just an interesting fact about the osprey. It said they may log more than 160,000 miles during their lifetime, which is like from 15 to 20 years. It's just amazing how far they go, And everybody, all the things you did, we had this really short amount of time and you did amazing things. And I learned so much during this little bit of time about each of the different birds that you had.
Yeah, I think we still have a couple more too. Yeah. Barbara, you're muted?
You didn't have to listen to my husband come in and say, I'm getting hungry. Anyway, back to what Melody was talking about. We like to we go down to Cottage Grove every year and do the bike trail down there. It's a really nice bike trail. And there's a campground there, Schwartz. It's under, I'm trying to think which national organization, but anyway, I can watch osprey fishing in the river there, and it's so cool. And yeah, eagles are really increasing in numbers. Every time I go to the coast now, I see a bald eagle every single time. Anyway, I chose to do the varied thrush because I have 3 of them that are visiting every day. As soon as I put the hazelnuts out, they're there. And I didn't get very far, like most of us didn't, but their range goes from up in Alaska, and I'm with Heather. My map is kind of crappy, but it's small too. Anyway, here's Canada coming down their winter, and then their summer is in the US along the coast. And obviously the bird is not even close to finished. And the varied thrush migration, it migrates in short distances or partial. And along the coast, they tend to stay there, live year round. But once you get inland, they go south and they leapfrog. So the ones that are the farthest north go the farthest south in the migration, which was interesting.
Wow.
Anyway, that's what I found out. Thank you. In our cool. Very short.
That's awesome.
But I really love having them visit. I think since there's 3 of them, one must be a juvenile.
Yeah, I love those birds. I can't remember if everybody went. Is it anybody else want to go?
I think we all went, right?
I think so too. I think there were 6 of us.
Yeah.
Okay. I got all distracted listening to everybody's. I love learning new information about these animals.
It's so great.
Yeah.
It's so fun.
I think it was fun that we all chose different birds.
Mostly, yeah.
Mostly, yes.
Yeah. Awesome. Great. Well, let me wrap up our recording part. I had a thank you slide, but I guess I don't really need to bring that up. I'll just end the recording. So don't go, because I'd like to talk about our next field trip. But for the folks that are watching this later, thank you for being here tonight. Thanks for watching. And we have a in-person field trip on the 24th that we're going to figure out the location for tonight, and then our next Zoom session will be on April 12th. So check out the Columbia River Nature Journal Club on Facebook for the time and topic, or for the link and the topic. All right, so let me stop the recording.
Oh, I need to.